Literary citizenship for me is a means of connecting. It's to do with all what it is to write. Isn't just to sit alone at home behind your computer or your typewriter or even pen and paper. That's the solitary activity of writing. But literary citizenship is really important as a means of connecting with other writers, and something that Stephen King in his book on writing emphasized is a lot of writers, at least, should be readers too. And if you connect with other writers in a community, you're going to be connecting with readers. They also might be your first point of contact as agents and publishers. But I did want to say that I did read, even though Stephen King was my mentor, my virtual mentor, I did read Eudora Welty's On Writing. And she, in the first couple of pages, actually it was in the foreword to On Writing written by somebody else, he'd mentioned about, kind of a caveman sitting around the campfire. And although modern day writing is actually written, storytelling started orally, and we can't forget that. That's, sitting all by yourself doing the writing doesn't really connect us with the roots of telling a story. Telling a story was orally, and I think that it can be really important and an opportunity. I'm very resistant to the idea of reading my work out loud, but if you think back to, like I say, in the intro to Eudora Welty's On Writing, that was the first storytelling. It's a very human need to tell stories. And actually, Robin Lefevre, in her article, Success, Taking the Long, No Longer Than That View, she mentioned the same thing as well. Why do humans write? To tell stories. But we told them orally longer than we've been writing them down. Of course, there has been some writing it down. Egyptian hieroglyphs might be fiction. Who knows? Of course, they take it all as real history, but who knows? Those stories, there's so much we don't know. Anyhow, literary citizenship is very important for connecting, because telling stories was about connecting. And so just because we write stories all by ourselves does not mean that we don't need to connect. And in fact, Stephen King even had in his book as well about how it's a kind of a telepathic connection with your reader. You write, they read what you write, and you are connecting, but you won't feel it unless you are part of the literary community. So there's so many ways to connect with the writing community as part of literary citizenship. The primary means for me to connect, of course, is to be a perpetual student, to get involved in this MFA program. And I feel really lucky to be here. Of course, I'm paying for the privilege, but it's a wonderful way. I took 2 years off between undergrad and grad school, and other than some live editing I did with a friend, it was a lonely place to be. I wrote during that whole time, but I really missed the connection. I was not really a part of a literary community, except for through WordPress, and that was actually an important thing. Like the live editing with a friend was great, but WordPress community it takes it, like, it's a little step further than the SNHU writing community. SNHU writing community is great. It really reminds me of a Facebook feed. And I think we can get social media fatigue on those kinds of feeds where it's just short little entries and responses. It's not as in-depth as putting up a blog post, which of course is personal essay, and I just love writing personal essays. I'm sure my professor Tiffany can tell that when I approach an essay, I'm telling a personal story, like, what I think and why I think it. I love writing that kind of thing. And blogging really lends itself so wonderfully to the genre, if nothing else, for lack of a better word, of personal essay writing. And that's a great way to connect to your community, because you can write a personal essay about your struggle of the day, and you get a lot of feedback. And there's just more opportunity to expand on and connect through a WordPress community, for example, blogging, versus just, oh man, I had trouble writing today, and then somebody might respond to that, and that's fine. But like a blog post where you write a personal essay, it's just, I guess I'm just wordy. I mean, this video is going to be really long, I can tell. 15 questions later, it's, yeah. Anyhow, maybe I'm just a little loquacious, but I certainly like my WordPress blogging community. In addition to, I think it is great that the SNHU has a writing community that's like a Facebook feed, because that's what a lot of us in this social media world are used to, other than the fatigue of, scrolling a news feed. WordPress has a search engine where you can actually see something topical. You can type in, I want to read blogs where people are feeling the exact same thing I am about topic X. So this is an interesting question about leveraging your connections. And yes, these can be some of your first contacts in through literary citizenship and connecting with the writing community. These can be some of your first contacts with publishers and agents. I'm more focused on the community aspect. And once I'm not a student, I want to be a professor. I just had a flash thought, though. I guess I'm actually at such an advantage as a student because the professor doesn't actually get to submit their own writing for feedback. And that's something I'll probably miss if I do become a professor. And that's when the writing community will need to leverage them to satisfy that kind of community and get this kind of feedback I'm looking for that's going to continue on. Like as a student, I'm going to get way more feedback than a professor ever would. The only problem would be spreading yourself too thin amongst too many communities and not being adequately able to reciprocate, because writers are firstly readers, and we can read each other's writing. Even Stephen King has a group. Interestingly, he's good friends with Barbara Kingsolver. I mean, I kind of think of her as a literary writer, and Stephen King as a genre writer, and yet they are buds, and that's awesome. So literary citizenship is very important, especially when I'm no longer getting an automatic community from being in class. Of course, leading the class, I'll still get to read all my students' work and be involved that way, because I mean, there is just something about giving that kind of thing. I mean, for a while, I thought I had to be like an expert writer to be a teacher, but then I realized, wait a minute, a teacher is a coach. Just like you've got a figure skater and she's a prodigy and she's going to go to the Olympics, she still needs a coach. And her coach doesn't necessarily have to be a prodigy herself. But she just has to know the skills and be able to provide the guidance. And I know that that kind of community is something I'm looking for. So I'm less about leveraging to, get, yes, I want to be published, but I'm just not worried. I'm not allowing myself to imagine earning a living from that. I want to earn a living as a teacher. How does my reading preference influence me? Well, I've been around long enough that I've been able to, my reading preferences have evolved. When I was younger, there wasn't a big young adult market. So I went right from middle reader to adult reading. So in my 30s, when there wasn't an emerging young adult market, partly fueled by Harry Potter, of course, I actually read exclusively young adult for about 8 years. It's only recently that I've gone back to adult fiction because I feel like I've kind of exhausted myself in the young adult market, but I really enjoyed my time there. And when I was a reader of young adult, that's what I wanted to write. Now that I'm reading adult fiction again, I want to write adult fiction. So it changes over time, but certainly what I read influences what I write. And now, right now, I've always, no matter what, whether it's been young adult or adult fiction. In my 20s, I was into more realistic fiction, but mostly I always go back to speculative fiction. I've rediscovered Stephen King again in that 8 years I was reading young adult. I missed a lot of his books. I'm going back and reading them now. There was always some that, like, I definitely read, a few in that time period, but mostly it was young adult. Anyhow, now I'm reading mostly speculative fiction. I live in the real world every day, as long as the Matrix isn't correct. We're all in the real world. Love the Matrix. But so I look to fiction to give me that extra little bit that's not real. For example, I'm reading Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, and it's set in 1976, and she time travels back to the antebellum South. And I'm sure she's done some wonderful research, so I'm getting like a real authentic idea of what it was like. But as the reader, starting from a modern time period, I get to travel back with her. And to me, that's just more fun than just reading something that's set in that historical time period. I love that little extra speculative element of she's time travel. Then we've got, fish out of water kind of theme. Oh, I love that kind of stuff. I just like that little bit of extra that tells me that that there's more to just real life. And so that influences my writing. I like to have a speculative fiction element in my writing. And I love speculative fiction for its broad, fantasy, sci-fi. There's just so many horror. I don't write horror, even though I've read lots of Stephen King that could be considered horror. He is more of a speculative fiction drama. Sometimes his stories are just good old ghost stories. One of my favorites, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, is just a girl who gets lost in the woods. And of course, it's got some scary elements in it, but it's based on real. And yet there's just, in the dark, in the woods, fantasy is going to come into it. But like I was saying, when I read young adult fiction, I wrote young adult fiction. So I did rewrite a young adult novel. I'm starting to rethink it, though. My character started out at 12 years old, and thanks to a time shift, she ends up at 14. Well, but she's really 13. Everyone thinks she's 14, but she's 13. It's actually kind of a neat way of allegory for how fast we grow up. Like one day, it feels like we grow up overnight, and certainly with this time shift thing, everybody did think she grew up overnight. Anyhow. So that was what I was writing in. It could be considered middle reader, though, because of the character's age, like the ages of the character being 12. Yeah, like I say, now I'm into, because I'm reading so much adult speculative fiction, that's what I want to write. So certainly learning about different genres will absolutely influence my writing. Because I could stumble across stories that I find captivating, and then like I mimicked the young adult genre, and then mimicked speculative fiction. I write what I read. So if I get into reading a whole bunch of literary fiction, I could totally have a transformation where I am all about writing what is real. And but it just depends. Like, for example, for MFA 507, which is my next course, we got to choose. And I went straight to the pairing of Kindred with H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. So it just depends on what I'm exposed to, but absolutely learning different genres influences my writing. There's actually, I didn't realize in speculative fiction, I kind of thought like science fiction, and fantasy and horror, but like it's actually deeper than that. There's the utopian and dystopian fiction. I mean, there's a lot of subcategories in the speculative genre that I haven't really delved into, and I've always been meaning to. So there we go. The writing habit I most want to continue to develop is daily writing. Connecting with my writing daily is very satisfying. It's so funny. It's so hard to get started. And even if I leave off on the previous day in the middle of a thought, so I know where I want to start, it's still hard to get starting. You got to start over every single day that you start writing, and it's hard. But it's so satisfying after I'm done. And then the next morning, I'm like, why is this hard again? so, so daily. That's the writing habit that I most want to keep doing. Maybe someday it won't be a struggle. I still struggle with it. I've been trying on and off a daily writing habit for 2 years now, and like I say, it's so wonderful after, but I still that starting every morning. I mean, there's the automaticity of ass hits butt hits the chair, and and I start writing, but making myself get the butt in the chair is what I still struggle with. Making the goal achievable though every day is what helps me do it every day. If I gave myself a very lofty goal of must write, Stephen King recommends 4 to 6 hours every day, that's not going to happen. And I would just be beating myself up, and that would be a negative thing. And maybe, I don't even know, I might even give myself writer's block if I put that kind of pressure on myself. So I make the goal achievable, and then, like I said, at the end of my writing session, I feel great. So when the goal's achievable, you feel successful because you can achieve it. And that's the thing about sitting down. Like, when I'm hesitating and struggling and, I don't want to do it, I know, but I only have to do it for 15 minutes. I make it a very small start. I always go long, but I don't have to go long. You can do anything for 15 minutes, and you can find 15 minutes in any day, no matter how busy or crazy it is. You could just make yourself, if you can just get your butt in the chair, you can make yourself do 15 minutes. And then once you're done, you're like, oh, God, I achieved that. So you feel success every day. I think the key is to have, like, if your goal is to finish a novel, the starting and the end are so far apart. But if your goal is just 15 minutes, it's done before you know it, and you're successful every single day, and you don't have to wait to feel successful. I've seen that on TV lots, where somebody talks about, I'm not enjoying life right now because I'm waiting for this future success. And that's a miserable way to live. So if you set a goal that's achievable daily and succeed at it daily, then you learn to feel successful. And that is truly how the momentum keeps going, even though I do have to nag myself to get my butt in the chair every day. Um, This kind of daily writing habit, for example, for 15 minutes does help me be more productive, because it is amazing how the word count grows even just 15 minutes a day. Um, I actually have been bad the last week, and I missed a week in August too, but I did start another new project July 1st with a daily writing habit, and I'm 20,000 words. So, it's, 10 weeks, 20,000 words. That's pretty good. And some days it's only, I don't know, like 200 words. Some days it's 500 words. And it grows. It's really amazing. If you do it daily, it doesn't feel like it's enough. Like, especially when you read something like, Stephen King says, 4 to 6 hours. When he wrote Carrie, I mean, it's not realistic for the rest of us, but when he wrote Carrie, he's, up until 4 a.m. every day, getting a little bit of sleep and then going to work. And kids are in diapers, but admittedly, he had a spouse to help him. And I'm sure she was doing most of the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. It was the 70s after all. Let's, but we're not going to get into gender wars here. But, the 15 minutes a day still gets you, to the end of a novel. And it doesn't mean you're not dedicated either. Like, just because you don't like give up your life and ignore your family and have a messy house and never floss does not mean you're more dedicated to your writing than I am doing 15 minutes a day. The advantages to workshopping is feedback from readers. Oh, I mean, I can go on WordPress. In fact, I follow a blog from a guy. He's in Ireland, and he's been editing his novel for actually quite a bit of time now, talking about how he's going to give it out to his beta readers, but he hasn't actually done it yet. And I didn't sign up to be one of his beta readers because, again, reciprocity is an issue. I don't have time to read his novel. So, but if I did, then I could hopefully ask him to read mine. Now, of course, with workshopping, the privilege of being in an MFA program is I'm getting the workshopping, and my classmates have to read my stuff. So that's wonderful. There isn't, and I don't mind reciprocating because that's part of how I'm going to learn as well. I mean, reading their writing is going to help me learn, because the biggest thing is patterns. And I know Tiffany, our professor, had said this, but I totally believe this even before she said it. Patterns start to emerge as you read. In fact, patterns even in other people's writing is going to be triggering something in your own mind about how you want to set up dialogue. I notice I love J.K. Rowling, and I have read all 7 Harry Potter books, and I have them on audiobook, unabridged, so I have listened to them like ad nauseum. But she's a big one for the dialogue tag said. In fact, there's certain sections of, like, I think it was in Goblet of Fire, I was just like said, he said, she said, he said, she said, and I was like, wow, okay, somebody needed to help her edit that because, I mean, I totally get that said is a perfectly adequate dialogue tag, and what is being said is more important sometimes. However, overuse, isn't that funny? I mean, I found something in Goblet of Fire I could critique. The overuse of said as a dialogue tag. Anyhow, this is the value of workshopping, and this will be the value of reading, who knows how big the class size will be, but like reading 19 submissions possibly and critiquing them all, and then getting 19 critiques back on my stuff, and going through it and looking for patterns. There might be like a few offhanded comments, and I'm like, well, that's out of left field. Yeah, no, I'm not going to be changing my book based on that comment. But if I start to see patterns emerging about my own overuse of said dialogue tags, then that's invaluable to my future work moving forward and having it ready to publish. So anyhow, that's the advantages of workshopping. So another thing I can learn from workshopping other people's work is I can apply that. Well, certainly I hope to apply that to the profession of teaching, but it can also, editing and coaching does. It's funny how many writers I hear, oh, I hate editing. Well, it's a little different when you're editing somebody else's work. It actually can be really rewarding having, I mean, maybe it's a little different if I'd have to try it in a professional environment to know for sure, because maybe if it wasn't a friend, or a fellow classmate, maybe I wouldn't be as invested and enthusiastic about the success of the work, but I actually think I would be, even for strangers. So anyhow, editing and coaching, the skills I learn in workshopping other people's work can definitely translate to jobs in the editing and coaching field. Now, pure editing, I guess, is just like being the grammar police, and that doesn't sound like that much fun. However, the caliber of writing that I encounter, even in what I guess would be deemed, the amateur arena of students, is way beyond grammar. So you don't have to be so I guess I find it hard to imagine that editing is being a grammar Nazi, because the quality of work that I'm getting, even on a first draft, is way better than it. This isn't like, this is not grade 12 English. This is way better than that. So so then it actually becomes, editing becomes about improving the writing, but not from like a grammar police kind of aspect. So anyhow, hopefully that'll translate, moving forward in teaching and then maybe editing and coaching as well. So the part that I foresee workshopping playing in my professional writing career is definitely along the branch of editing and coaching. Learning to critique others is really going to be helpful if I wanted to get into editing. And I, really think that would be a possibility. It just depends on what kind of employment opportunities arise. But learning to edit other people's work, critiquing, I kind of use the term editing and critiquing synonymously because I think we're at an advanced level. At least I noticed that in my fellow classmates. Like, I don't have to edit them like and be the grammar police. I certainly feel that we're beyond that. And critiquing is about coaching them somewhat as well. Asking provocative questions that will inspire the writer to take a second look at what they want to say, how they're telling their story, not what they're telling, but how. And editing and coaching, I think, can be that kind of support. And certainly workshopping is going to make a huge difference in that. It's also going to make a big difference if I do get into teaching, because then I will be an expert, in theory, at critiquing work and helping edit and coach and get my student writers to help, not just, because we're going to be relying on our peers to do the critiquing, but I expect that we'll actually get some professional critiquing as well from our professor. And that kind of stuff, I'm going to be like well practiced by the end of this course. So, of course, I've mentioned that the teaching is where my focus is going, the online teaching of writing certificate. And SNHU's program is so awesome that it offers that. I didn't even really realize I was looking for an MFA program. This is just like bonus that it's got that element out in it. I think, of course, personally, it is about continuing the environment that I love so much as a student. I've really dragged my education out being a part-time student, so I've been able to claim, I'm a student for 17 out of 27 years. So yay. And I want to just keep going. I'll be in this MFA program for a number of years. And then that's where I just want to finish up. I really believe in post-secondary education, first off. Now, I don't necessarily, as a grad student graduate, I don't know if I expect to be teaching undergrad. So that's really what I want to do. I've always been like that though. Like when I was in elementary school, I thought I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. And when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be a high school teacher. And then I was in undergrad and I obviously wanted to work at a college. And now I'm taking grad school so I can go back and work at that college level. So no matter what, the business courses are going to help because as a writer, you need to be in charge of you need to be, you can't just do the writing and think you can hand it off to somebody else and trust the process. You're going to have to be more involved in that. I've certainly experienced that personally in like I had written my young adult novel and my professor's like, this is great. Why don't you, find a publisher? Well, yeah, I mean, I even got like a book called The Children's Writers Market. I don't know. I can't really remember now. It was a couple of years ago. But nothing really happens unless you make it happen. And it's just nice if somebody comes out of nowhere and says, "Hey, guess what? I loved your book so much. I passed it on to a publisher and like, they're going to be contacting you with a contract to sign." But you need help even if the publisher falls out of the sky like that for you. You still need to know what you need to know before you go sign on the dotted line. And so I ended up going to Lulu Press Inc. To do an ebook, and because it was free. But if you don't put the work into marketing, your book just sits there. I'm so glad it's sitting there. It was very validating for because I wanted to pursue an MFA program, and I wanted to have this credential that this manuscript that I worked so hard writing and had it peer reviewed and edited to death, and was told at the end, like, this is great, you should do something with it. It's not just sitting on my shelf, it's on Amazon. But I don't really know the marketing side. I really look forward to all those courses. The MFA program at SNHU is going to be just great because it's got that business side of publishing branch on the course tree that will help me maybe take that book through Lulu Press Inc. that's on Amazon somewhere. And then, of course, when I finish, thesis 1, 2, 3, I'm going to probably do speculative fiction 1 and 2, and then thesis 1, 2, 3. And I've got a new manuscript of publishable length, and it's been workshopped, and it feels great. I'll know what to actually do with it more than just like stick it up there as an ebook without a nice cover. Yeah. So there's just so much I look forward to learning as I work my way through this program. In addition to writing and publishing a novel, or another novel, if you count my first one through Lulu, I really think editing and coaching is something of interest. It just depends on what's out there. My goal really is to get a job teaching at a college or maybe even a university in undergrad writing departments. Hard to say though what kind of jobs are out there. I would definitely be interested in editing and coaching, as I said, especially the coaching part. I mean, there was this movie years ago, and what's it called? But anyhow, it had Kate Hudson in it, and she was a stenographer, and there was a novelist, and he was coming up, like he only had 30 more days till his deadline, or maybe he got a 30-day extension. Anyhow, he realized he was just going to dictate a whole novel to a professional stenographer. But she ended up, of course, being his coach, sort of, so it's a romantic comedy movie. And of course, it's all just, like fiction, as everything so much is. But just the idea that he just couldn't do it on his own. He needed coaching. I mean, even The Talisman was written by Stephen King and Peter Straub collaboratively. I like the idea of collaborative writing. Stephen King has also written a book called Sleeping Beauties with his son, Owen King. His other son, Joe, who writes under Joe Hill, has been doing, his own novels and making a name for himself by, other than King, by going under Joe Hill. But the idea of not doing it all by yourself is kind of neat, so coaching. I like the idea of coaching in addition to teaching, but teaching most likely is going to be my primary focus.